Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down, run them down.
Alrighty, hello there everybody, how you doing? Alright, so you know that this past weekend was the Abroth Independence online streaming event, because obviously they couldn't gather in Abroth to do the Independence March, obviously with COVID-19 currently being in effect, obviously. So they had the online streaming event, and there was a lot of things that were there. I mean, it was awesome. There's the one young lady whose name is escaping me, but very, very pretty girl who plays the guitar. She's absolutely stunning. She's, I mean, very good with the guitar, great voice. She's, you know, she was one of them. There was a lot of different guys, different people performing, musicians, keyboardists, bagpipes, all kinds of cool stuff. It was really exciting. But then they were also putting up interesting informational stuff. And one of those things that I'm going to show you here today is going to be a collection of clips from people who voted no in the previous referendum in 2014. And them just talking about very reasonably, clearly, and frankly the reasons why they voted that way then, and that upon watching that independence referendum and everything they were told and after voting the way they did, they watched virtually every single promise crumble. They've now changed from no to yes in support of independence. So I find this stuff very interesting. Obviously, these people are, professionals. You'll be able to see that from watching them. And like I say, they just very reasonably put forth their reasoning, and I think it's pretty powerful stuff. So we'll go ahead and we'll go on and get to it here. I think there's around 8 to 10 different people you're going to see speak here, but I think it's all very interesting. It also shows you clips of things that were going on in 2014 as they're describing certain events. So you're going to see some clips from the past in mixed in with these. It's very interesting stuff, so please give it a look, and we'll see you at the end.
It's really pulling at you from different sides, We
are talking about a big change in the British Constitution. It's like home rule within the United Kingdom.
This idea of a new federalised UK with a more powerful Scottish government.
English votes for English laws requires a decisive answer.
It was the view of Westminster that the Scottish question had been settled and it was to be brushed aside. To find out that what you'd thought was going to happen kind of didn't materialise, that was really tough. Labour definitely took Scotland for granted. What I find is you've got members who have a belief in the party, a belief in the values, a belief in social democracy, and a belief to work across political divides to do the greatest good. But then what you find is you've got, for example, Scottish Labour refusing to even work with the Scottish Parliament on something as awful as Brexit. Before the referendum, I knew 14 Labour Party paid up members. After the independence referendum, that had dropped to about 4. Come the EU referendum, there was me. I can't vote for Labour anymore. They're not doing what's best for the country. The outcome for Scotland within a UK outside the EU seems pretty bleak. It seems to be that the UK's future is tied to a more xenophobic, racist, homophobic country. Do we want it to be in the EU progressive and one of the biggest trade blocs in the world, or go with the UK and be hand in hand with Trump and like the president of Turkey? Who do we want to stand with? What does that say about Scotland? The people that I know who voted no thought yes campaign, people thought it was going to be like, this magical wonderland. If we're more on, say, look, the first few years are going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it. The ability to shape a constitution, to say these are things that we believe in, these are things that Scotland believes in, surely that's worth more than the current setup we've got at the minute. There should be on our independence referendum, I think that the circumstances we were in 2014 have totally changed. Have totally changed. The question needs to be put to the Scottish people again. To me, it seems the only choice now. This time, I would vote yes.
London. Came up to Edinburgh University in the 1990s and got into mining and petroleum, renewable energy. Did my masters up here at Dundee Uni. You know, I've been working on natural resources here in Dundee for the last 7 years or so.
You, English, out!
I spent 11 years in Scotland, 7 years in Dundee and 4 years in Edinburgh. I've never had any anti-English, it's just not there. Often I find the people coming out of that are people who don't stay in Scotland. They've been told that there's anti-Englishness and they are English, and they say, okay, well if I went to Scotland I'd confront this, I'd have this in my face, but you don't. I'm just telling you, it just doesn't happen. So a lot of this comes down to emotion. My dad lives in Italy, I feel part of Europe, and that Brexit vote changed everything for me. So I think that's more important than money or anything like business or whatever. It's also about sort of identity. It forced me to think about, you know, what we're trying to do, you know, and that Scotland can be an independent country in Europe, an equal member, just like Belgium or Sweden or whatever. What's going to happen now in England, what's going to happen in the UK is that Labour's not in any position to win a general election for a long, long time now. The Conservatives are going to rule the roost. Scotland will be outvoted, and that will be it, and we'll be sort of cast away in our own sort of little England, really, expanded little England reality, and we don't want that. And Scotland, when you actually confront the issues, you can see Scotland is going its own way on so many different issues. We have different views from people down south and people south of the border, and it's time to, it's really time to sort of make a grown-up decision and say, right, well, we can do this ourselves. We don't have to have the future which is being foisted upon us. We can actually make our own decisions. Well, I think that it's quite likely that we'll exit, the UK will exit the European Union without a deal, because the two sides are just so far apart, and then you're looking at all the barriers. We'd be down to WTO, World Trade Organization rules. We wouldn't have those trade agreements in place with the rest of the world and with European neighbours. So we would be in for a real economic shock as the UK. So we can take a different path, which is the one I'm suggesting. So a lot of European nations and political parties would welcome our membership. You know, there is a good news story here amongst all the dross of Brexit. There is a good news story for Europe. In terms of the 2014 referendum, the yes side couldn't have done much more than they did. If people are not there willing to be convinced, then it doesn't matter what you say, frankly. But I think this time there were far more soft voters, far more undecided voters, and that's the main reaction I've had when I said I'm coming over to yes. People said, okay, we're going to have to make a decision about what we're going to do, because frankly we don't know. You want to come out of Europe, that's fine, that's up to you guys, but you know, Scotland can have a different path, and that means voting for independence. That's the only viable way forward. I will be voting yes.
I was always quite clear that I would vote no. Always, before you vote, look as hard as possible at the small print. Really look at the opportunity in front of you. Well, my name's Caroline Castle. I was born in Hastings in Sussex, and I lived most of my life in southern England. And I've always been strong family connections here, and I moved up to Edinburgh about 6 years ago. I wasn't hugely engaged in politics anyway and didn't know that much about Scottish politics. Why would Scotland not want to be a member of the UK? I couldn't see any arguments to me that made sense. Anybody who thinks that where we are now is the same as it was in 2014 hasn't been reading any newspapers, you know. Added to that, I've changed because I absolutely love living in Scotland, and I've done quite a lot of reading. I did a course on Scottish politics at Edinburgh University, and it has changed me and it has changed my views. Even though I'm living here, you know, like you could say middle class Edinburgh and everything, I'm also aware of how that there is a big difference culturally and socially in Scotland compared to where I used to live. It is a different culture, it's a different country. It has its own identity and it has its own political views, and they're not represented in the UK. So I can really identify with that now. Brexit was a shock, but the aftermath has been even more of an awakening, I think. I've been really shocked by the change in direction of the UK government. I know we've had a Conservative government before, but it's nothing like what we've got now, which is a very populist-driven, authoritarian Tory government, and not one that I would have ever voted for. Even in the event of a fairly disastrous outcome of Brexit, in a general election, the Conservatives are probably going to win. If there was a really strong Labour opposition, then you could see a fight back and a pushback going, which might rescue us. But I can't see that. I think because they don't really see any clear opposition from the centre-left, their target is to kill UKIP off by appealing to that voter mentality, which is obviously driven by fears of immigration, a distrust of foreigners, and a more protectionist mentality. I was horrified by the idea that if we don't get a deal, if Theresa May doesn't get a deal that she wants, that her answer to that is to dive down into a low tax, low spend economy, bringing corporation tax down, undercutting everybody. Given what's happening to public services and the NHS at the moment, the effect of that would be devastating, and I was shocked that she would even suggest it. I was surprised and disappointed by the response from Ruth Davidson, who I had quite a bit of time for before. She's clearly got some talents as a politician, but you know, she's up a creek without a paddle, like many of them. She can't do very much unless she goes well against her party. And maybe her long-term career aims are not in Scotland, I don't know. But she's certainly not reflecting the views of Scottish Conservatives, actually. I'm now a member and supporter of the SNP, but Scottish Conservatives are generally very pro-Remain, and she's not supporting them either. There may be some transfer of powers back to Holyrood, but it won't have control over immigration, and Scotland needs immigration. It won't have control over its economy. And I suspect that regardless of independence, post-Brexit, the Barnett formula is going to be scrapped anyway. So all the arguments about, oh, but you're getting the Barnett formula, which gives you a cushion, that's going to go anyway. So, you know, it just won't have the control over its own destiny. The businesses that I talk to, which have very diverse workforces, you know, people from all over the EU, Americans, for various diverse workforce, I don't know whether they're more worried about Remain or more worried about independence. Once we know what's happening, then people can make plans. I actually think that there is an underappreciation of the assets and the resources that Scotland has. And I think that might be because I'm an incomer and I've seen it through different eyes, that I think people don't appreciate the resources and the assets that Scotland has to capitalise on. And I really think that maybe with independence it would give it a bit of a kick in the, you know, kick up the backside to get going. And I can see that would give the confidence to Scotland that it would need, because it has immense resources. My friends and family who are up here, who were all yes supporters last time, are kind of, they're surprised that I've changed position. And my daughter, she voted no, but she's definitely voting yes at this time. And I think a lot of young people will feel the same in Scotland. If you have a big negative doom-mongering campaign, I would be very sceptical of it, because I don't think it's true. There is a great opportunity for Scotland as an independent country. I shall be voting yes.
In 2014, I was campaigning to remain within the UK. What we were promised was to remain in the European Union. That's become a complete fallacy. It's almost like a different era. My name is Mike Daly. I'm a solicitor advocate in Glasgow. I work for law centres. I've done so for about 25 years. Law centres act on behalf of the public, ultimately helping people to maximise their rights.
In terms of what we want to deliver for social justice, we're probably not actually very different in terms of our aspirations. Where we differ on is, do we believe that remaining in the UK with additional powers?
In 2014, what was on the table was more devolution, greater powers to the Scottish Parliament. It's almost like having the best of both worlds was on the table, remaining in the European Union, but having the ability to do things differently in Scotland. The reality is now, after, goodness, 7 years of austerity, it's quite plain to me that we now are in a completely different situation. We had the European referendum in June of last year, and I mean, I suppose even before then, I certainly had my doubts about the future of remaining in the UK. But since that point in time, in terms of Brexit, I've certainly been on a journey. It's not been quite the road to Damascus where you just suddenly see a blinding light. It's been much more, I think, a gradual process of realising that the future that Scotland has under the Conservatives at Westminster is 15-20 years of more austerity. What we've got is the prospect of becoming an insular nation under the Conservatives at Westminster, and I just think that direction of travel that we're looking at is utterly bleak. So from my point of view, I came to the very clear conclusion that we're at a crossroads in Scotland, and we have the opportunity to go down a completely different path, and a path, I think, which is an egalitarian Scotland, a Scotland for everybody, so that everybody has got opportunities, a Scotland that does not indulge in punishing the poor, does not have sanctions that punish people for not being in work. So I think we're going to create a different country. So once you realise that that's the options, from my point of view, it became clear to me that the party that is very much at the vanguard of that is the Scottish National Party, and that's why I joined the SNP. I think there is going to be a second Scottish independence referendum, and I'm very excited about that, because instead of having another 20 years of austerity, and we've already had 7, I see the opportunity for a Scottish independence referendum giving Scotland the ability to go down a completely different path. If we don't choose to go down that different path, well, what's the options? The options are to have more austerity, turbocharged austerity under the Conservatives at Westminster. Also, we will be dragged in the direction of travel that the Tories are taking us, which is very much regressive. It's scapegoating people who are different to us. It's scapegoating foreigners. It's punishing people who are not as well off. It's a horrible, horrible future. And I don't want that future for my children, and we can do something about this.
the independence referendum in 2014, I didn't think that the moral authority lay with the national campaign. My name's Tom Morton. I'm a writer and broadcaster, sometime journalist, former light entertainer. Worked for the BBC for about 20 years with a daily music and chat show, and retired about 2 years ago after a small heart incident. I think my feelings about the independence referendum in 2014 were basically about the morality of nationalism and what we mean by nationalism and why it has any moral power. And I felt at the time that it lacked moral authority, because what I feel nationalism needs is a sense of actually working for the good of the poor and of the majority of the people in the country it supposedly represents. And I think what we had then was no real sense of being oppressed. The history of nationalism is all about fighting against oppression, actually self-realizing a country because another country, a bigger country, has oppressed it. And I didn't think that was the case in 2014. I didn't think that the moral authority lay with the national campaign, because for me, the main moral impetus in politics has always been working for the poor and the rights of the underprivileged. And for me, the Labour Party was always the party of the underprivileged and the poor. What has happened since 2014 is that I believe the Labour Party has abandoned that representation, has forfeited the right to be considered the party of the poor, is completely in meltdown in Scotland. And what we also have in Scotland, because of Brexit and because we now face the possibility of a Tory party in power for all eternity, is that sense of moral authority for nationalism in Scotland. Because an independent Scotland would have the moral ability to stand for the poor and to stand for, if you like, the forces of good in politics. There were two stages in my disillusion with the Labour Party. The first one, curiously enough, was to do with alcohol, and that happened because of the Scottish Government's policy on minimum pricing for alcohol, which was opposed by the Labour Party. And it became evident that the Labour Party there was in the hands of the alcohol industry. I felt that that was a totally justified and absolutely correct thing for the Scottish Government to do. And then there was the whole business of Brexit. And Brexit to me was just unbelievable in the sense that the Labour Party refused to engage with it in any meaningful and cohesive way. And I think also the Corbyn leadership has been an utter disaster, for not just for the Labour Party as a whole in the UK, but particularly for the Labour Party in Scotland. Brexit for me is crucial because for me, my inheritance, if you like, that I can pass on to my children and my grandchildren is to be part of Europe. I don't see myself as a little Britain person, or you know, I despair at the thought of my children and grandchildren not being part of a Europe where, you know, there are no borders and where we can actually work together, apart from anything else, for a peaceful Europe and a peaceful world. So for me, Brexit was the absolute killer app, if you like, and the idea that we were now in thrall to a Westminster government which was going to, first of all, oppose immigration in such a brutal and right-wing fashion and take us out of Europe without any thought for the implications other than some spurious post-colonial nationalist notion of what Britain means. That to me seemed completely anathema. And the offering from the Scottish National Party seemed reasonable It looked to me to be about a broad church which would offer the possibility of working for the rights of the poor and for social justice, and it seemed like the right way to go. I don't think anyone should be under any illusion about how difficult this is going to be. I think it's important to recognise that this will not be some romantic fantasy, and I think it's also important to understand that we're not talking about the Tartan Army here. We can't glorify in defeat. We can't take refuge in the idea of being really nice Scottish people who didn't win the next independence referendum. Because if the next independence referendum is lost and the no side triumphs, that's the game over for at least a decade. So there's no point in rushing into this. It's got to be planned properly. There's got to be serious strategic thinking, and I don't believe that that can be done quickly. So it's got to be at least 2 years before the next independence referendum, and it has got to be one. I will be voting yes.
The logical argument when you're being fed fear and lies is to stay with what you've got. It really was an insult to myself to vote no again. I joined Yes Bikers in December 2014 when I converted to the Yes campaign after voting no. It was run by Craig Thompson, and as of June last year he passed it on to me. We are a group of political bikers as such who support the Yes movement. We go to pretty much every event. It was Scotland-wide, but 2017 is proving to be worldwide, with going to The Hague in April, Catalonia in September. I mean, one bike's loud, you put 100 of them together and you wake a country, and that's all we try to do. I voted no. I grew up in an area where there wasn't a lot of Yes activism, so the only information I had was from the BBC and the mainstream media. So for me, it felt logical to vote no with the information I had received.
Now Deutsche Bank has weighed in, likening the potential fallout from an independence vote to America's Great Depression.
I then moved up to university, met new people, opened the door to the information, and then once you have the information it's a simple choice, and followed by the lack of completion in the vow and all the promises made by the no campaign. It really was an insult to myself to vote no again. I was one of the people who voted using the postal vote, so I voted a week early, and the resounding surge in the Yes campaign probably came within that final week. I still don't know if I had voted on pen and paper in that poll booth what I would have voted. I just knew something deep in my gut felt wrong. For Scotland itself, it's less of a crossroads than jumping off a cliff into Tory Britain or taking the nice journey towards self-preservation, self-determination and a positive future for everybody within the country, especially the immigrants and refugees that Scotland's proud to welcome in. This is their last chance, and I expect hundreds of attacks against everybody involved, all the Yes groups, campaigners. I mean, I think the mainstream media will try and focus on a campaign, again, based on fear, lies, deception, and not what it's actually about. I know it's a kind of internal struggle between compromising what you voted for and realising that things have changed. Maybe not that you were wrong. Look at the way the Scotland's moved forward in the past 2 years. Look at the circumstances with the EU, Brexit, the Tory government, the imposed cuts on Scotland. And then look at how Scotland governs itself without Westminster. Look at how well we can progress as a nation ourselves. And I'll be voting yes.
I felt it took me just after the referendum to actually hear from different sorts of people how the UK government is affecting them and how bad the situation is. Not being able to vote kind of felt like you weren't really a citizen, kind of like no one cared what you thought. And it still feels like that because I still can't vote, which is really, really annoying because I'm politically engaged. I do politics almost every single day and I feel so strong about issues, but I can't make any input and I can't make any change. In 2014, I was 12, 13. I looked into it and I actually did a few surveys and I got so much no, and I thought maybe I should just be no, and maybe that's the choice. It took me till after the independence referendum to really feel so strong for a yes vote, because at that age I felt like I could engage in politics. I joined the SNP on the 23rd of October 2015. In the next Scottish referendum, which I hope will come, I know I'll be able to vote because the SNPU values my voice, and that is a great form of empowerment for me and all the other 16 to 17-year-olds across the country. In independence referendum 2014, the turnout was 75% for 16 plus, so it's relatively low, and with so much up for stakes, it's so important that we engage because it's been shown that the upper class, middle class vote more than the working class, and party policy can steer towards the people they want to win their votes from. By not voting, we're not getting a whole view from everybody else. We can't moan if you don't vote. I think the barriers for people at that age is you have no one to really relate to. A lot of politicians are older. It can just sound like you're at school, like you're just being spoken at you and you don't feel included. Also, barriers are sources of information. You don't know what's reliable on social media, to be completely honest. Just understanding and knowing what the implications are, because there are a lot of unanswered questions from both sides. What the Tories are right now is they're proposing themselves as to be the progressive right, and what they really are is a new UKIP. And what the Tories are proposing is a small, closed UK. What Theresa May has said has just been all pretty dire. I think the Brexit vote is pretty sad for Scotland, really. I feel like Scotland's just going to be more and more suppressed. We're not valued as an equal member. I think it's particularly depressing that young people are losing out in great things. You know, the single market is a great mechanism for young people, and you have such an uncertain future. I think the opportunity that we once felt was there is not there anymore, and the horizons have definitely narrowed. Some of my friends are really, really nervous about the prospects for the future. They're thinking about how is this going to impact me? What's the benefits? What's the disadvantages? None of my friends were pro-Brexit. It has moved them to being more yes, and I think that's really important because they will be the next 16-year-old category to vote in the next referendum. It's important that we start convincing them now, because the next referendum will be vital for Scotland. It's about safeguarding Scotland now and not letting it go downhill with the UK. I think the most important thing to say to the older generation is it's our future, it's my future that's in your hands. I want to see myself in an inclusive Scotland. I want to see an inclusive world. I don't want to see a closed off UK. I'll be 16 in September and I'm voting yes.
I think the seeds of changing my mind were probably sown when the Tories were elected. I feel that Scotland is in a really, really unique opportunity here to escape Brexit. My name is Elizabeth Carnahan and I work in cosmetic ingredients. A large percentage of our customers are in the EU and we rely on barrier-free trade in order to sell to them. So obviously single market membership and customs union membership is super important to our business. I mean, I didn't campaign for no or anything. It was a very personal decision. I had several staff members that voted yes, and I can remember the day after the referendum, and they were really defeated. They were really down, and I felt horrible. So there wasn't any joy in voting no. It was certainly nothing to celebrate. It was just something that I felt was necessary at the time to preserve my business and preserve jobs.
And the accession to the European Union will have to be approved by all the other member states of the European Union.
Countries like Spain, who've got their own secessionist issues.
There were voices coming out of the EU at the time, and it didn't look like we would be able to stay in if we went independent. And so, based on membership of the EU, I said no.
It would be easy negotiations because at the moment Scotland's legislation has fully to 100% the acquis communautaire of the European Union. There's not much to negotiate then.
It wasn't a quick change. I think the seeds of changing my mind were probably sown in 2015 when the Tories were elected.
And I will now form a majority Conservative government. And I will do everything I can in future to help this great country succeed.
And then Brexit happened, and that was scary. The real turning point was probably the Tory conference. A lot of the language that came out of that I found offensive and very worrying. I remember Theresa May saying, you know, if you think you're a citizen of the world, then you're a citizen of nowhere. And I don't agree with that at all. I think people should be outward focused and they should look beyond their own borders. And I was also quite worried by foreign workers were going to need to be listed and that information given to the government. And again, this goes against what I stand for. It goes against my beliefs.
But from this cradle of the Confederate...
I grew up in Alabama under George Wallace, who is quite a divisive figure.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
And I actually went to a segregated school for the first 2 years of my education, and you know, I'm not that old. So yeah, I have quite a lot of experience with divisiveness, and it's something I really can't stick.
There's no difference between those who try to divide us on the basis of whether we're English or Scottish, and those who try to divide us on the basis of our background, race or religion.
I've never had a negative experience in Scotland as a foreigner. I've been here since 2001. People have been kind, welcoming. I've lived all over the world. I've lived in the US, I've lived in Canada, I've lived in Brazil, I've lived in Germany, but I have never felt more at home than I feel here in Scotland. The indie voting community has been extremely welcoming, and I was a little nervous because I said no last time and I felt like I crushed a lot of people's dreams, but everyone's been, you know, really welcoming and they seem quite happy to have new people on board, and I'm really thankful for that because my opinion has completely changed. If I can't export, then I can't function. I need the single market. I need membership of the customs union. Tariffs are something that can be overcome. It's the non-trade barriers that are scary to me. Customs checks, certificates of origin, you know, all of these things will increase the lead time on products leaving Scotland or leaving the UK, because my products are not time sensitive, but I can imagine for people who are importing things like food, things like fish, for instance, it would be very difficult for them if their goods are held up at the border. So trade doesn't just affect export, it affects imports as well. So if you rely on components to make a computer or to work in the technology industry, these goods are going to be affected as well. It won't just be goods leaving, it'll be goods coming in. And so it affects every business, not just exporters. There are a lot of issues tied up in trade they're very complex, and I'm not sure that our current government in Westminster really understand how complicated it is and what we're up against. To say that Scotland will lose trade with the rest of the UK is ludicrous, unless the UK decides they don't want to trade with Scotland. If Scotland remains in the EU, whatever trade deal England has with the EU will be the deal that they have with Scotland. So it's a bit disingenuous to say that that would happen. I often see numbers quoted about, the amount that Scotland trades with the rest of the UK is much bigger than the amount that Scotland trades with the EU. But remember, these numbers are based on a UK with a healthy economy, a UK that is in the EU, and a UK that is able to trade within the EU and participate in the trade deals that the EU has negotiated on their behalf. So once the UK does crash out of the European Union and is forced onto World Trade Organization rules, Theresa May has said that she's basically going to turn the UK into a low corporation tax haven, so to speak. That's really dangerous, and it means that trade between Scotland and the rest of the UK will fall, because you're not dealing with the same healthy economy that we're dealing with today. The UK will be diminished if this happens, and you're looking at trading with that diminished economy. And the same works for the tax revenues. The tax revenues will go down quite a bit. There won't be as much money going around. Public services are going to suffer, both in the rest of the UK and Scotland.
So I can confirm today that next week I will seek the authority of the Scottish Parliament to agree with the UK Government the details of a Section 30 order, the procedure that will enable the Scottish Parliament to legislate for an independence referendum.
And we're really lucky to have the opportunity to escape from Brexit and to not have to suffer the fallout of a hard Brexit and crashing out of the EU. It's a lucky position, it's a unique position, and not only supporting independence and voting for independence, but getting to decide what happens after that, to become more involved. I've never been a political person, it's not really my thing, but I will never ever sit on the sidelines again. I will always be engaged, and I'll always work, because we have a chance to build the society that we want to see. And it's not an opportunity that many countries get. So I think we should embrace it. I think we should welcome it. And I think we should all work really hard to build something meaningful and to build something extraordinary. I will be voting yes.
My name's Mark McCurgo. I'm living in Edinburgh. Until quite recently I was living in London, and I'm very delighted to be living in Edinburgh and being a part of the Yes movement. Well, as you can hear, I'm basically English. Actually, my father's family were from Scotland, but I've always been brought up as English.
You know, since the Brexit vote, I've had loads of messages from people in other parts of the UK asking if they can move to Scotland.
I was very, very intrigued by the first referendum. living in London at the time. I was a Lib Dem member and supporter, but actually independence is on offer for Scotland. Why wouldn't you want that? And it seemed to me, after considering it for a while, that they were actually very, very good. Very broad possibilities for the Scots nation to reclaim its status after 310 years. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that there is a difference between Scotland and England. In the aftermath of that vote last June, it seemed to me that the SNP were the only ones with a plan at that stage. Very, very inspiring. And so within a matter of weeks, my wife and I decided that it was time for us to make a move, and we've moved to Edinburgh. We've moved our lives, our family, our business to Edinburgh, and we're very excited to be here at this point in the history of the development of Scotland.
A simple yes or no will suffice.
But now, afraid a simple yes or no doesn't actually do it, Mr. Chairman.
So I work all over the world and do a lot of work in Europe, and friends and colleagues all over the continent. And I'm very concerned at the moment that not only are we putting out very bad messages as the UK about what we want our relationship to be, but also there's potential damage in terms of trade, in terms of travel, in terms of people moving backwards and forwards. But I'd rather be backing people who are very firm in their commitment to maintaining those connections and links, rather than putting them on the table to bargain and potentially say that no deal is acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable at all. And so I want to do what I can to fight to keep those links with Europe, to keep links with the world, to build on our relationships with other countries, rather than put them at risk in a game of brinkmanship, which is what it seems to me that the Westminster government is intent on doing at the moment.
The UK is about to turn its back on membership of the world's biggest single market. Imagine what will happen if Scotland chooses to stay. We will become a magnet for talent and investment from all across the UK.
I think there are risks to Scotland staying in the UK. This is one of the differences between the upcoming independence conversations and referendum and the first independence referendum. Now we have a position where the United Kingdom is being torn from Europe. Staying in the UK under those circumstances doesn't look good at all. It's a very, very different balance of power and probability than last time. It is, do we see ourselves as a strong, independent nation within a broader European brotherhood? Or are we content to be shackled to a United Kingdom that's prepared to risk so much to gain so little? The first IndyRef looked very exciting from my position in London last time, and it seemed to me that this was not a narrow political movement. This was a broad church and a whole spread of people coming together to look at the benefits that an independent Scotland could have. And so I found it was very inspiring. This is the country that brought the Enlightenment to Europe and the world in the 18th century. And it's important that we remember that and we take that forward in these times of fake news and half-truths. The Scottish Enlightenment showed the way forward 300 years ago, and it can do it again. And the value that people put on Burns and his sentiments and his words is another indication about how this is a country with a very profound interest in social justice and inclusion. My wife actually grew up in Scotland, then went on to Glasgow University to read economics. And she's always told me about the value that Scots put on education and how the Scots' view of education is kind of different to the English one. And the more I've read around it and the more I've experienced, the more I think that's right.
So let me issue this open invitation today. Scotland isn't full up. If you are as appalled as we are at the path this Westminster government is taking, come and join us.
I'm very delighted to be here, and I'd encourage anyone else with commitments in those directions to think about coming to join us. I think there's going to be some very interesting times ahead, and we need support. People are welcome in Scotland, there's absolutely no doubt about that. I've been made so welcome since moving here. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I will be voting yes, absolutely.
Climbing Arthur's Seat on an overcast March day, thinking about politics. The route to the top is thronged and I hear snatches of conversation in many languages. It seems to me, returning after an absence of a few months, that Edinburgh increasingly feels like a European capital. Edinburgh's resounding 75% vote to remain in the European Union, higher than anywhere in the UK, adds to the sense of welcome. I reach the rocky summit, worn smooth by legions of feet over the centuries, and look across the city to the blue of the Firth of Forth and Fife beyond. Here is gathered a polyglot crowd of mostly the jeunesse of Europe. The situation has changed, and I have changed my view. There are lots of things that you can see from Arthur's Seat which remind one what a great city Edinburgh is, what a strong European tradition it has, and it's been looking great, Edinburgh, in all of the politics since 2014, and it seems to me that it's ready to take its place as a European capital. My name's Jackie Kemp. I used to be a journalist. I'm probably describe myself as a kind of business writer now. I was undecided for ages. At the time I just ended up being very no. Towards the end I suddenly thought, no, this is just a bad idea. It just felt like devolution still had more to offer, but since 2014 that hasn't really come to pass. I feel that the spirit of the devolution settlement is not being understood or respected by the government in Westminster over Brexit. A lot of people in Edinburgh, they're quite cautious. You know, it's famously kind of regarded as a very sort of bourgeois city. The whole Brexit thing is just really reckless, and I think probably in democracy one often has to choose between the bad and the worse, and lots of people in Edinburgh would like to remain part of you know, maybe a federal UK and the European Union, but I think given the choice, I think we'll probably go with the European Union because England's sort of fallen into some pretty dubious hands. I have friends who are European nationals who live in Scotland and have lived here for many years and have made their lives here, and you know, it's been a year, almost a year, that they don't know what's happening. So it's been a long time that they've had to deal with the uncertainty, and it seems mean, and not everybody's got the money that it takes to become a citizen, and there are hurdles to jump through. You have to sit an exam. You know, I have Polish friends who might struggle a little bit with that, but they make a huge contribution to life here. Scotland needs them. I mean, we need these great people, and the government in London could have actually just said, everyone who's here at the moment, you're fine. Governments come and go, so it's not about that. I was prepared to be in the Union in 2014 with a Conservative government, but Brexit's not like that. It's a really huge change, and I just don't think it's good for Scotland. There are lots of English people who are my friends and who I respect, who really hate the direction of travel that England is taking just now. On every opportunity that Theresa May and the others have had to open discussions with Scotland or with Ireland and Northern Ireland, they haven't taken those opportunities. The English people were told that if they voted for Brexit, it would threaten the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom, but they didn't take that on board. They didn't seem that interested. So I actually feel, I wrote this in my blog, I feel that England's left us. I don't feel at all bad. I feel I feel that I tried. I really tried personally. I really tried to save the Union.
Next week, I will seek the authority of the Scottish Parliament to agree with the UK Government the details of a Section 30 order, the procedure that will enable the Scottish Parliament to legislate for an independence.
I hope we will be offered a choice. I feel really positive about the fact that the referendum's been called. I see it as an opportunity for Scotland to seize the moment and become part of what's really essentially a great institution. I know the European Union is flawed, but so much has been accomplished. You know, I see the European Union as essentially a really positive institution which has provided a structure for small countries to retain democratic rights and to have some regulation and structures which would be expensive and difficult for Scotland to create by itself. But you know, we can't really control what England does. But we've got a choice that's about controlling a bit more what Scotland does and what institutions Scotland is part of. There are challenges that lie in the road of independence, but I see it as being a very different situation now, because I think the Scottish Government's doing well at building links with other European countries. It's got a pretty high profile thanks to what's been going on with Brexit. I think we'd be welcomed. I really do think we'd be welcomed. When I was on the no side, I kind of felt like that I wasn't really on the fun side. I think I'm looking forward to being part of the Yes campaign, and I want it to be really positive and inclusive, and I want people to feel really great about being engaged in such an important democratic moment and making history. I will be voting yes.
All right, so I wanted to share these with you today because I find these to be very interesting, obviously, and I like hearing the actual stories from, Scots on the ground there, talking about how they felt in 2014 and how they and why they feel the way that they feel now. So I very much, look for these stories because I find them so interesting. So that's why I wanted to share these with everybody today. Hopefully I'm sharing these with some people over here on my channels over here in America. Obviously, my other main channel being true crime based. Obviously, this is my Doctor Who channel where I kind of talk about other things that aren't, criminal justice or true crime related. And so, that's why we're here. But hopefully some people are taking a look at what's going on over in the UK and Scotland. And we'll see that Scotland, I think, needs a little bit of help here, because the British media is always going to play dirty. And it's unfortunate, but I mean, I've been following this now long enough, close enough to see that it's true. The UK media is very, well, it's basically, it's highly in servitude to Westminster. And it doesn't report fairly in a lot of ways when it comes to Scotland and the other nations that make up the UK. So I don't know. Anyway, it's for me it's interesting. But when you listen to the reasons of the folks that you just heard, and you listen to their really reasonably well thought out reasons why, and the way that they explain, why they eventually came to the decision that independence was the answer, and why Scotland should choose its own future. So I agree with these things after what I've been looking into, and that's mainly because I see nothing genuine coming out of Westminster. When it comes down to it, I see nothing genuine coming out of Westminster. But I see a lot of genuine, activity and a lot of things coming out of the SNP and the Scottish Parliament that I do think are honourable and stuff. Now, In politics, are there politicians that get into trouble every once in a while? Yeah. Yeah, it happens all the time. You know, but for the most part, you can tell the SNP and the Scottish Parliament have been focusing on and trying to make life better for all Scottish people. And I think it's obvious, you know, in the way that the Scottish NHS is outperforming all the other NHSs in the UK. I mean, when you see these things, that's because the SNP and the Scottish Parliament is in charge of the NHS in Scotland. It's pretty much almost completely devolved, the NHS is, to the Scottish Parliament. So if it's being run that well, that's a tribute to the leadership in Scottish Parliament, right? There's plenty of other examples, I'm sure, to go through, but that's all I want to go through today. I know this was a bit of a long one, so thank you all for staying tuned, especially if you're over here in America, because in the coming year or so, the Scots may need a little bit of help in getting their voices heard amid the clamor of the UK and what I know, the disingenuous things that we're going to see come out of Westminster, just because of what I've observed so far. And I know Leopard or Westminster isn't going to change its spots, so I think it's a matter of time before we start seeing some really, really nasty things, like, for instance, what was done to Alex Salmond. We may see another attempt at essentially almost like political assassination coming up, you know, trumping up a bunch of charges against him, acting like it was a big deal, only for those things to fall flat in court as really fast. A trial that was supposed to take over a month or so took less than a week, I think. It's just, when you look at it, it all fell flat. The proof, the backup, the proof to the allegations wasn't really there, and so I'm sure we can expect more of this type of stuff. I don't know why the Crown Prosecutor went forward, and I'm actually shocked that a judge there in the UK didn't say something about that fact himself. But ultimately, a jury of his peers found him not guilty. So he had faith in the criminal justice system, and that faith was well founded. So kudos to him. But like I say, the SNP, the independence movement, is going to have to be kind of on guard over the next year or two, because yes, I believe it is starting to become clear to more and more people how obviously Scotland and the UK, or England, are moving apart, or Westminster I should say, are moving apart. They just have different, you know, sensibilities at this point. Scotland has one vision of the future, and Westminster or England has a different vision of the future. It's just I'm not here to say either one is right or wrong or bad or good or anything like that. I'm just saying that they're going in different directions. So the next natural step is that Scotland's going to have to become independent so that it can go down the road it's clearly headed down. And that road is not compatible with the road that the UK is going down. It's just obvious that that's what's happening. So, all right, folks, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.